We begin with some breaking news this morning. U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to impose a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States.
What if I told you that one phone call from Donald Trump accidentally triggered the most significant military pivot Canada has made in 50 years? Not a war, not a crisis, a threat. And the response, a fighter jet powered by a Rolls-Royce engine built by a Swedish company that Canada is now seriously considering over the American F-35. This isn't a defense nerd story. This is a geopolitical earthquake, and almost nobody is talking about it. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to see Canada, Trump, and NATO in a completely different light. To understand why is this so important, first you have to understand something most people forget. Canada has one of the most strategically critical airspaces on the planet, the Arctic, the Northwest Passage, the corridor between Russia and North America. For decades, Canada protected that airspace with aging CF-18 Hornets, jets designed in the 1970s. By the 2000s, Canada desperately needed a replacement. And the obvious answer seemed to be the F-35, America's crown jewel stealth fighter. But here's where the story gets complicated. Canada actually pulled out of the F-35 program back in 2012 over cost concerns, then danced in and out of the competition for years. By 2022, after what felt like an eternal procurement saga, the Canadian government finally selected the F-35 as its preferred choice. Contract negotiations began. Everything looked settled. And then, Donald Trump came back. In early 2025, Trump didn't just return to the White House. He returned with a message for America's neighbors: pay up or else. Tariffs, threats about Canada becoming the 51st state. Rhetoric that many Canadians didn't just find offensive, they found it alarming. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that defense planners started whispering out loud. What happens if your most important military ally is also your biggest geopolitical bully? And that question, that uncomfortable, almost unthinkable question, is exactly why a Swedish jet with a British engine is suddenly being reconsidered for Canadian skies. What is the Gripen? Why does Rolls-Royce matter? And why is this keeping people in Washington quietly nervous? Stick around, because the answer involves billion-dollar contracts, Arctic sovereignty, and a geopolitical chess move that Canada may not even fully realize it's making. Let's talk about the jet at the center of all this. The Saab Gripen E, built by Sweden's Saab, yes, the same country that just joined NATO, the Gripen is what defense analysts call a high-low mix fighter. It's not trying to be an F-22. It's not pretending to be the most powerful jet in the sky. What it is arguably the most cost-effective, most maintainable, and most strategically flexible fighter jet in the Western world. Here's what makes it remarkable. The Gripen can operate from roads. Literally, Swedish doctrine was built around the idea that in a conflict, air bases would be destroyed early. So the Gripen was designed to land on highways, be refueled by a ground crew of just 5 people in under 10 minutes, and be back in the air. No massive airbase infrastructure required. For Canada, a country with enormous remote Arctic territory and very few northern air bases, that's not a gimmick. That's a genuine strategic advantage. Now, the engine. The Gripen E is powered by the General Electric F414 engine. But here's the twist that makes the Rolls-Royce Gripen framing so interesting. In the original Gripen variants, the power plant was derived from Rolls-Royce technology through a licensed partnership. And as Canada explores next-generation options and potential modifications, Rolls-Royce's involvement in the broader engine ecosystem becomes part of the conversation. More importantly, the supply chain for the Gripen is deliberately non-American. And in 2025, with Trump threatening tariffs on Canadian goods and making noise about sovereignty, that supply chain independence has gone from being a footnote to being a headline. Because here's the question defense procurement officers are now asking in Ottawa. If we buy F-35s, American jets, with American parts, American software updates, American export licenses required for every upgrade, what happens to our Air Force if the political relationship with Washington deteriorates further? It sounds dramatic. A year ago, it would have sounded paranoid. Today, it sounds like due diligence. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This is overblown. Canada and the US will always be allies. This is just political theater. Maybe. But let me show you 3 specific things that happened in the last 12 months that changed the calculus entirely. And by the end of this section, you tell me if Ottawa is being paranoid or pragmatic. Shift number 1, the tariff shock. When Trump announced sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods in early 2025, including steel and aluminum critical to aerospace manufacturing, it wasn't just an economic move, it was a signal. Canada suddenly had to confront the reality that economic coercion from Washington was on the table. And if economic coercion is on the table, defense procurement dependency becomes a national security vulnerability, not just a budget line. Shift number 2, the sovereignty rhetoric. Trump's repeated suggestions that Canada should become the 51st state crossed a line that even the most pro-American voices in Ottawa couldn't laugh off. When a sitting U.S. president questions the legitimacy of your nationhood, even rhetorically, military independence stops being theoretical. Canada began accelerating conversations about Arctic sovereignty, independent intelligence infrastructure, and yes, who builds their jets. Shift number 3. Sweden joins NATO. This one is underappreciated. When Sweden formally joined NATO in March 2024, the Gripen went from being a neutral country's jet to being a NATO interoperable allied aircraft. Suddenly, the argument that Canada needs an American jet to work within NATO structures weakened significantly. The Gripen already flies alongside NATO partners. It already shares data link protocols. The alliance compatibility argument for the F-35, one of its strongest selling points, became less exclusive. Put those 3 shifts together, and what do you get? A Canada that is, for the first time in decades, genuinely weighing whether its defense relationship with the United States needs a hedge. And the Gripen, Swedish soul, Rolls-Royce lineage engine, non-American supply chain, is that hedge. But here's where it gets really interesting, because this decision isn't just about jets. It's about billions of dollars. It's about jobs. It's about whether Canada sends a message to Washington or quietly keeps its head down. And there are people on both sides of this debate who are terrified of what the other side might win. Let me walk you through what's actually at stake. The F-35 contract Canada is negotiating is worth somewhere in the range of 19 billion Canadian dollars. That's for 88 aircraft. And built into that deal are promises of industrial benefits, work for Canadian aerospace companies, jobs, technology transfer. Lockheed Martin has lobbied hard. American officials have made clear that buying the F-35 is part of the broader defense relationship. There's even been quiet pressure suggesting that not buying American jets could affect other aspects of the bilateral relationship. That pressure, that subtle coercion baked into the procurement process, is exactly what's making some Canadian officials uncomfortable. Because the Gripen offer from Saab isn't just a jet. Saab has historically offered something called full technology transfer, meaning Canada wouldn't just buy the planes, it could potentially build and maintain them domestically. That means jobs in Canada. That means a Canadian aerospace industry that isn't dependent on American licenses for upgrades and modifications. In a world where Trump is president and economic nationalism is the new normal, that offer looks very different than it did 5 years ago. And then there's the Arctic dimension. Russia has been rapidly militarizing its Arctic presence. New bases, new radar installations, upgraded Su-35s and MiG-31s patrolling routes that cross directly toward Canadian airspace. Canada's commitment to Arctic sovereignty has long been more rhetorical than real, underfunded, under-equipped, dependent on American assets. A fleet of Gripens, cheaper per unit than F-35s, deployable from remote northern strips, easier to maintain in extreme cold, could actually change Canada's Arctic calculus in a way that 88 F-35s, burning through maintenance budgets, might not. This is the argument Saab's advocates are making in Ottawa, and it's not a crazy argument. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this. What Canada is wrestling with right now is a version of a question that every American ally is quietly asking themselves in the Trump era. Can we still trust Washington as an unconditional partner? And if not, what does that change? For most countries, that question stays theoretical. They can't afford to act on it. They're too small, too exposed, too dependent. But Canada has the resources. Canada has the industrial base. Canada has the geographic reality of being NATO's Arctic frontier. And Canada has a procurement decision worth nearly $20 billion sitting on the table right now. That's not theoretical. That's a real choice. And the choice they make will send a signal, not just to Washington, but to every other American ally watching. If Canada buys the Gripen, or even meaningfully reopens that competition, it tells the world that Trump's rhetoric has real consequences, that allies are quietly hedging, that the American defense industrial complex can no longer count on political loyalty to close the sale. If Canada swallows hard and buys the F-35 anyway, it signals that no matter how much noise Washington makes, the economic and military ties are too deep to break. Neither answer is wrong. Both answers are profound. And that Rolls-Royce lineage engine humming inside a Swedish airframe, potentially one day patrolling the Canadian Arctic, it's not just a procurement story, it's a story about what Western alliances look like when the glue that held them together starts to crack. So, do you think Canada should buy the Gripen and send Washington a message? Or is breaking from the F-35 too risky a move? Drop your take in the comments. I read every single one. If this video made you think differently about something you thought you already understood, that's what this channel is for. Hit subscribe, because we go deep on the stories that look like defense news but are actually about power, money, and the future of the Western world. I'll see you in the next one.